Okay.
Yeah, just so New York has changed. Things like taking the subway, which were kind of an everyday occurrence for me. I live in Brooklyn. A lot of my activities, most of the dance studios that I worked with are in Manhattan, all of which are slowly reopening, but still very much closed and with lots of restrictions. So now there is definitely more of a bike culture, and I bike a lot more. I mean, I always biked here in the city, but if there's a choice to take the subway over biking, myself and many more people are now biking, which is exciting, for New York. And the cars did come back in full effect, unfortunately. But there are more bikes, and there's more life outside because of the restaurants are mostly serving outside instead of inside. And as long as the weather is nice, even though some of the restaurants have opened up a bit in terms of like very minimal capacity, as long as the weather is nice, it seems people prefer to dine outside, which is a change for the city. There are a lot less tourists, which is a big change, a major, major change. And I think there's a little bit more care. There are free refrigerators in different neighborhoods, and mutual aid. People are I think there's just a different sensibility, like right now I'm at Governor's Island, which is, kind of a little oasis. And so I was able to get a space here in the Climate Museum house. So this is an old colonial home where there are many colonial homes here because it used to be a colonial outpost for the British. And now it's more of a recreation area. It's a national park and a city park. And it also has some private interest here. It's a very complicated place. Anyway, there are people writing, I think my battery was a little low. There are people writing like postcards outside for voting, to get voters in other states to vote. And I don't know, I feel like, New York is still New York. It's still kind of I don't know how I would describe it normally, but it's still, nonstop construction and all the things that big cities do, but everything has slowed down a bit. And there's a very interesting kind of shift or turn in the culture towards, I think, people doing what they need to do versus, the kind of hyper consumption that can often be a part of living here. And that makes me feel better about where we might be going if we can figure out how to
Yes, that's the next step.
Be a little bit more conscious of how we are on this planet. Yeah. So.
And are you doing a project now? Is that
here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm kind of just working on my work. I'm kind of just coming here just to like recalibrate, recenter, because it's the first place that I've been able to be outside of my apartment. And because I'm here till the end of the month, so I feel like I come here and I decompress, and I have a new thing brimming about whales. And I'm reading Moby Dick, which is really exciting. So I've been thinking, there's many rooms in this house, and so I've been thinking about, like, well, today one of the things that I was going to do is just like go through the rooms and read the book aloud and record it and just start from there, because I read the first chapter aloud, and it's so incredible. It's very I feel like it's very contemporary in a way. And there were about almost 400 whales that were recently beached in off the coast of Tasmania. And so that's been on my mind, and just the idea of the big mammal and the grief of climate change, and the grief of, kind of, I don't know, there's something about whales that remind me of like they're like this other society of beings that are teaching us how to grieve. I don't know what that's just something that's coming up, and I still need to research and stuff. But also teaching us how to sing, because they do the sonic, how to listen. And so yeah, this is like a current interest right now.
And I never read Moby Dick, actually. Is it the first time you're reading it?
It's really good. I've never read it either. And I was a literature major in college. And I remember maybe reading some other Melville works. I think he's done some short stories, but I never read the book. And now the first chapter, if you could just read the first chapter, it's funny, it's political. I mean, he's talking about Afghanistan, like a war in Afghanistan. And I mean, there's things that are being said, he's talking about Manhattan, and like all the activity in Battery Park. And it's just so funny and the way that people, are kind of busy around the waterfront. And I mean, being in New York, it's kind of very prescient.
And especially on Governor's Island, because it has so much history.
Yeah.
So what are you busy with, Roshana?
I just started a PhD, so I'm busy with that. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting hearing you talk about New York, because London, it feels like it's gone through quite a similar transformation. And having been here in the lockdown, I think at some point no one could get a bicycle, because everyone was getting a bicycle, and having this freedom in the city that is usually, running at a pace that makes little human sense, to walking around and having this space around. There's still not really any tourists, the cars returned, but I think something in the pace changed. And I arrived back to London. Actually, I came to London because of the lockdown in Milan, where I was living, which was the first place to lock down. So it was quite a good reintroduction into the city, actually, this kind of slower. And then, now I've started the PhD, and I'm looking forward to having another space to go to. So it's all online, but they have these blocks. They're kind of blocking off time for people to visit the studios, and then clean them down, and then other small groups go. And I hadn't even thought about it, not having had another space apart from home to go to and have that shift, the kind of mental shift, arriving somewhere, kind of everything's just moving between different rooms in the flat.
Yeah.
And have you guys been doing, obviously, all your work online then? Yeah.
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 I mean, that's been really exciting for me because, I mean, one thing is to be able to meet with people who are in so many different parts of the world. And one of the very first classes I joined was KJ's through Movement Research. And she was doing these Saturday classes, and the very first class was 70 people.
Mm.
And I thought, never, if it had happened in a studio, would there be 70 people. And nor would they be coming together from such diverse places in the world. It wasn't all the US, it wasn't even just the US and Europe, but people were there from South America and Scandinavia. I think there were people from parts of Asia, Australia. It was really quite extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't really engaged with the online thing in a physical way so much.
Mm.
I think that probably lends quite a different experience. I feel all of my online has been conversation, which I find quite alienating in a way. Like I think especially when they're long conversations, kind of for hours, because you don't, I don't know, you miss, for me, I miss the sense of people in the space and picking up on them, picking up on the energy of what's happening.
Mm.
How does it feel if you're doing something physical with the digital interface?
I actually really like it because where a studio is quite in some ways a sterile place. It's not that I mean I love empty spaces, and I love to be in a beautiful studio, but something about being in one's own space with history. I mean, Mayfield, you were talking about the kind of history around you in the house that you're in. And very often a studio doesn't have that, particularly if it's meant to be a dance studio where, in so many places, dance studios have bars and mirrors, which personally I hate, and not very nice floors. And but people often in their own spaces have found a different kind of freedom, and they almost give themselves more permission to do things that they might not do if they were in a studio, and also with lots of other people around. Like the intimacy of being alone in your space with the person who's teaching, or even people online, but actually you're turning away from the screen because you're moving and you're doing things, makes it really quite exciting for me. Yeah.
Do you feel a connection to the other people physically, in a way, haptically?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no. I mean, obviously, if there are 70 people, I wouldn't. And like one difference I've found is that when I'm teaching, I like to have a gallery view. I like to see people, everyone, or as many people as I can. But when I'm taking a class, then I'll often have speaker view. So the instructor, the teacher will be big, and I can kind of connect with them.
Yeah, I find that can you hear me okay? I had to plug in my phone because it was
Yeah.
I find that the different views that you can access. I mean, I've only taught through Zoom,
Right.
and so this can be such a interesting choreography of its own, but also a little bit disconcerting and a little bit disorienting, because sometimes I'm teaching and I want my voice to be the guide. And I'm not sure if you can relate to this, Ava, and then sometimes I may want my body to be the guide. And so there's a different way of instructing that has to be almost like pre-planned in a way, or at least just knowing what your options are. So for example, you can tell the group to pin the video, so that they can just see your video or pin your video, or if there are other participants who you want them to observe, you can ask them to pin, or they could be on speaker view. But the thing about speaker view that's interesting is that anybody can make the slightest noise and their video will come up. So it's a I think it's a constant improvisation. And then the other piece that actually a student brought up when I was teaching just last week was the kind of voyeurism that can feel intrusive, and even just being, not knowing who's taking this information, and Zoom, I don't know who's and so the other aspect of it for me was also like having times when I would allow, where I would just also just offer, or invite people to not have to use the screen or look at the screen, or that they can be having their own experience as I'm guiding them.
That sounds quite freeing.
Yes, it definitely gives the participants or the students the power to make choices for themselves in ways that I think when you're physically present in a studio, you don't often have.
Yeah.
A kind of freedom from being less observed.
Yes, I mean, you can turn your video off if you want. Although, as a teacher, I really like to see what people are doing. So
right.
I like to, I encourage people to leave their videos on if they feel okay about it.
Yeah.
But definitely I'm doing some teaching through the school in Arnhem, Artes. Because Mayfield, you studied in Amsterdam?
Yes, I did at SNDO.
Yes. Yes, I taught there way at the beginning in the 70s, late 80s, I don't even know. But yeah, very early on. But anyway, I'm doing some teaching at Artes, and one of the things I find is that the students who are at home give themselves more permission to do other kinds of things. It's like they don't have to do studio kind of things, but they can let their bodies move in lots of different ways that I think it's much harder to encourage people to do that when they're in a dance studio.
Yeah.
Like dance is such a big word. And actually like the swimming of whales or the, it's in a way it's harder to embody other ways of moving when you're in a situation that has so much resonance as a particular kind of situation, I think. Which is also why it's so beautiful to work outdoors. because you're relating to other another environment. And yeah, I'm intrigued that you're walking around in this house feeling the different rooms and the energy of the different rooms. And
Yeah, yeah. You can kind of hear. Can you hear the echo?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. It's a colonial house. I mean, yeah. I think it's definitely maybe haunted. It's a little.
Mm.
There's no running water.
That's interesting.
And there's no plumbing here on this island.
Mm.
And so everything is just nothing in the house actually works. Like there's a kitchen, but there's no yeah, you can't like use the kitchen. It's just a kitchen. And you can see the different time periods. So the kitchen, the heaters, they don't match the house.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were installed when people were living here. I think in the 80s, the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there were Coast Guard families living here.
Mm-hmm.
So there are heaters that look like they are probably from the 80s, or like not from now. And then because this is a museum house, there are these, you can see these lights, and the wall behind me. And then I think you can probably see through the door, but there's panels on the walls for art. And so that's more contemporary than the actual house. So yeah, it's a funny time warp kind of situation.
It's like a physical palimpsest, this kind of ring.
Yeah. I mean, I can show you some things if you'd like to see.
Sure, I'd love to.
Something that I really like is this this knob on the door. It's I think it's an original. I don't know if you can see it in the maybe if I pull it so that there we go.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah, this is such a beautiful it's probably brass. And this is like a kind of a sliding door to the other room. So I think that this was probably from the earlier, but I don't know. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it's from the 70s. Who knows? But it seems like it's not. So there's that, and these great sliding doors, and then there's a wonderful
and what a wonderful sound it made.
Yeah. The sound. And then there's a really beautiful, I'll show you the fireplace, and I'll put on my headphones because I'm here. The windows, I think the windows are pretty new. Definitely not from the 1800s. But the fireplace is so intricate.
Yeah.
It's that's wood. And then of course this is iron.
Actually, that reminds me of the doorknob. The lower.
The lower part.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So this is the iron part, and this is the wood. But this wood is so unique. It really, I really think this was probably an original design.
Hmm.
You know, maybe. But it's just like really beautiful. I can just kind of see it now from that.
It's lovely.
Yeah. And then, there's just the porch. You'll get to see the porch.
Yeah, okay.
Beautiful.
And that's probably from IKEA, but the rocking chair is a nice effect. But the house, I'll walk out so you can kind of see the house.
Yeah, beautiful.
And so that's what and then there's all of these other houses, right? So this is called Nolan Park. And this is where the generals lived, like the military generals in these big colonial houses.
Right.
What does it
And
feel?
they had other quarters for the soldiers.
Do you feel the history of it? I mean, do you feel like the conflict of it?
I feel like I think I'm like used to it enough to not for it to not be so present, but I do feel sometimes I feel it more than others. I think I'm just so happy that I have the space. It just feels like another creative space.
Yeah.
But I think where I feel the conflict the most is when I'm at the water's edge, because Governor's Island is located right where the East River and the Hudson River pour out into the Atlantic. It's right there in the middle. So you can kind of see this interesting kind of view of, Brooklyn and Manhattan and New Jersey. And I think whenever I'm looking at that water, that's when I feel have the most kind of emotions about this place, because that's where, and also there's a huge fort, like military fort with big, cannons and stuff. And so the houses feel a little bit more comforting. Yeah.
Yes.
So but yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I don't track my feelings as much. Part of it is because we're here, because of COVID, we can only be here until 6 p.m. But I did a residency here a couple of years ago, and we could stay until 11 at night. And that, being here at night is really, really, really great. That's when it gets really spooky and nobody's really here. And I really enjoyed being able to experience it that way. And then there was this time in the summer where, because of this beautiful, field, the fireflies would light up the field. And so that's something that's really special here, because you can see it in the parks in Brooklyn and Central Park and stuff, but not like this. It's really like more open space. And so, yeah, kind of magical in a way.
So, Roshana, what are you working on? Because when I looked at your website, you had lots of well, you make sculpture and you make response to space. I mean, we're talking about you being in a really interesting space, Mayfield, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, I work a lot. I mean, I'm cross-disciplinary, so I work across different kind of outputs. But I've worked a lot with sculpture or installation, also text or language. Yeah, at the moment I'm looking at, I guess generally looking at reorienting the axis of human and other than human relations. And the way I'm kind of seeing that is through looking at kind of the space in between, or the negative space between two bodies or subjects, objects, human and other than human, and seeing the kind of crossing of that space as something, well, kind of like working like a wormhole. So because I'm an artist who works with materials, I thought it's quite interesting to see the kind of abiotic or inorganic, inanimate, other than human, as the thing that we see as furthest away from us. And then you have the human, and this idea of how we kind of travel across this space, or how we travel towards each other. So if we think about the inanimate material as having some form of animacy or agency, but they're choosing this thing that's the furthest from us to act like a wormhole between two portals. So you have this process of like visiting, which would be like an empathetic process. And if it can be a process of visiting or getting to know, or traveling across this largest difference, can it kind of fold over and within that reverberate on all the relations that we see as closer? So then biotic or organic, other than human and other humans. So it becomes really a thing of like, how do we cross difference? How do we find more collaborative ways of being together, but doing it with this thing that's the furthest? So if I can collaborate with this material, which is not living, let's say, does it help me talk to the neighbor better? Or, but yeah, so, but doing it on a spatial level, so kind of the space between becoming a place of like interaction and exchange, like a meeting point. It's also a kind of the idea of the in-between, this more unformed place where things can be kind of unstuck and questioned. And this was probably a really roundabout way to talk about it.
But actually, in a way, it makes me think about the Zoom experience and how we're physically distanced. We have to, or somehow we have to go through that wormhole in order to meet each other, you know.
Which is both, I mean, Zoom's interesting because we're in each other's spaces,
Right.
but on such this two-dimensional level. I mean, it's quite interesting. I found it quite curious seeing Mayfield touching the fireplace, which is quite haptic, isn't it? Because we can only see that, but obviously we have the memory of what it might feel like to touch this wood and to touch this metal, and we're kind of visiting your perspective within that, your experience.
Yes, I mean, that's an interesting issue with, I would imagine, well, I know from having read a little bit of your work, Mayfield, that there is quite a bit of touch involved in it and kind of body-to-body contact, including the piece where you're under earth. the weight of the earth and the physical presence of the soil,
Yeah.
which sort of resonates with me when you talk about Roshana, about, you know, you have to actually imagine what that feeling of touching is like. So in my own work, I do a lot of touch work, partly because I'm an Alexander teacher and I've done a lot of kind of body work. So to make that transition from me having to touch someone to saying, well, you can touch yourself and get an experience from that, that is quite as relevant as having an outside person touching you, has been really quite interesting and, for me, exciting. And again, it sort of takes me to the place where, yes, the person who is doing that, who's involving themselves in this process, but they're alone, is able to take more charge of what they do and how far they go, and what they're feeling, what they're allowing themselves to feel.
And do you ask them to describe what they're feeling? Or would it be normally what you would, I don't know, so what, I imagine when you're doing touch, there's a lot that you're understanding through the touch.
Right.
So is there, how do you kind of feel that? Or...
Well, I think for me, what I'm asking people to do is to actually feel what they feel, really. You know, Danny Lepkov would say, see what you're looking at. And then, you know, you realize actually you're looking a lot, but you might not be seeing. So I think what I'm saying is, well, feel what you're feeling. And touch makes it much more present. So my own touch on my hand, you know, I can feel how long my fingers are, and that they don't end here, but they end back here. So, you know, if I trace it, then I can feel, gosh, I have really, really long fingers. And I have 5 of them because I can trace all 5, and it helps me articulate my fingers, my head, my legs, my feet, whatever, in a very different kind of way. So yeah, what about you, Mayfield?
Yeah, I feel that this invitation to touch. Well, I thought it was interesting when you say haptic, Roshana, and my sense of haptic is like something that is like, I'm not sure what it is actually. Like a haptic experience. Yeah, what is that? In relation to like even this idea of touch, or like what of you know, feeling the feeling.
So, I mean, it's a tactile experience, but one that's mediated through the ocular. So it's not a direct touch, but because it's something that you're, so in a way what Eva was saying about see what you're seeing or feel what you're feeling, this would be feel what you're seeing.
It's a what?
It would be feel what you're seeing.
Yes.
When you look
okay.
that you have the sense. So I imagine, so in this work that you do where you bury yourself under compost,
Yeah.
people around have quite a hectic experience, because there is this, in fact, when Eva was talking about it, you know, I saw this gesture, with the feeling of the weight. So it's that you can sense something without sensing it, which would be based on memory. And I think empathy play a role in that. But, you know, anything could be hectic. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be something that is, you know, within, that is kind of alive or involving a person. Painting that provokes a sense of touch or, yeah.
Yes, that's interesting, because I say feel what you're feeling, but at the same time, I do a lot of work with imagery. And I mean, even, you know, you're talking about reading Moby Dick and the experience of experiencing the whale. And these are all ways of perceiving that we do have. And that add to whatever we're actually feeling. But I guess kind of coming back to the truth of the body and the resonance of the body, the weight of the body, the breath of the body, the history of the body, and not only our own history, but the history present in our cellular structure. So yes, I mean, I also wondered what the feeling was for you to be in a place that was built by colonialists, yes, I mean, you know, these stories come up.
Yeah.
And are very, particularly at the moment when politically there's so much happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, this island was also called Paganak Nut Island by the indigenous people, the Lenape, who would collect nuts here. And now, you know, it's kind of like there's a lot of squirrels. There aren't any other animals here except for birds and squirrels and maybe some small, you know, mice. But I haven't really seen any mice or rats, which is funny because it's New York. But they're probably here, but I haven't seen them. I've only seen the squirrels. And so I think that in fact, I've collected a few things. I mean, just a few things. There's these wonderful chestnuts. Yeah. There's chestnut trees here. I mean, they're actually all over New York, but you know, it's just great to like pick up the chestnuts. And I think that there's maybe, I love this term haptic in relation to body and memory. And there's so many different layers of experience here that probably even connects to both of you being where you are, because of it's, you know, part of that. I had a call come in, sorry. Part of that the triangle trade, you know, and connecting the States to Europe. But there's so many stories on this island about people passing through. And then the Statue of Liberty is right across water. So, you know, another reason people come here is to see the Statue of Liberty, because it's very close. And of course, that was, you know, Ellis Island, where people were coming, you know, as immigrants. And so I think there's something about, yes, you know, the colonial presence and the way that they built these houses, but there's also something else that has been built here that's not about the actual buildings. And I think that I'm also maybe even more interested in that. Like how, I don't, you know, why is this island even still here? You know, what is there's a farm on this island, an urban farm. There's, yeah, it's such a funny place. I think it's a, you know, there are no cars. I mean, maybe a few, you know, just for the maintenance people, but, and so there's a certain way that it's, I think even if people aren't aware, there's a memory of another way of being here that is before the colonial way of being, of existing a little bit away from the urban.
What's the island called
life.
again?
So
The island called?
Yeah. What's the island called now again?
Governors.
It's called Governor's Island.
Governor's Island. It's quite interesting, this difference of naming in terms of the name that the indigenous people used was in relation to nature, in relation to the environment around with them and their interaction with that. This island, which is a statement and a position, and you know, a very clear hierarchy.
Yeah. The governor, it wasn't even the governor of New York. It was like the British governor. So I think that's, yeah.
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 So you guys, we've actually been talking for about 50 minutes, and I don't know whether there's anything more that, I mean, it feels like we could go on and on and on, finding out more. But I think partly because of the number of interviews there will be, I think I might close the record, like stop the recording now. Well, I'm sure that you must be feeling a lot at this time, Mayfield, because there's so many protests happening around America, but how productive are they? How far will their influence go? Is such a huge question, because the forces of the power hungry want to, well, they will use anything and everything, as we know, in order to put down
Yeah, I do.
those of us who want something different. And yeah. I mean, you know, for me, the work that we do is quite political, and I feel, you know, I have so much respect for what you're doing, Mayfield, in terms of standing up for ideals and for beliefs and for rights and for truths that are actually vitally felt. And, you know, I mean, you're doing your work too, Roshana, and,
Yeah.
you know, we all
Yeah.
are. But you know, sometimes I feel I'm so so little, and you know, I look at a few friends who are really politically involved, and I think they're out there and they're doing something, and what am I doing? But then I look at the transformation that happens when people, when I watch them work in classes, and suddenly they feel what they feel, and they feel who they are, and they begin to feel their own empowerment and their own ability to be and to do, which yeah, is enormous. Yeah.
I think there are so many ways of protest in a way.
Yeah.
There's obviously like direct action and physical protest and showing up in a place, and then I think so much is through thought as well, and how we think, and I mean that becoming action, and then through the body. I think like somatic practice. I've been thinking. I mean, I'm not a dancer. I don't work directly with movement, but maybe corporality to a point. But this idea of the somatic seems very relevant in going there before you can go beyond, and awareness, the awareness maybe that somatic brings in terms of interacting and engaging with the external surroundings, and the implications of that with other people and environment, and 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 also perhaps the ability of moving beyond your own subjective perspective through dance or seeing another body. So I think all of these things add up to protest.
I mean, I think here what I'm seeing, I think I'm seeing a lot of consciousness raising, and just people employing different tools to speak up and to expose injustice. And it's happening in every sector, in every field. And at the same time, with that exposure, there's backlash. And so, you know, for example, you know, the museums are being exposed for the money that they get in the places where they get that money from. The, you know, dance organizations are being exposed. I mean, you know, individuals are being exposed. And there's a way in which this kind of heightening of awareness also brings with it a backlash. And that part is, I think, the part that that's the part that's really, like, I feel a place where artists can work with the how do we recover, you know? If you are a person who is in the process of saying, yes, I am going to commit to raising my consciousness. I am going to commit to more awareness, more understanding of these particular injustices and how not only they have affected me, but how they've affected the land, or, you know, or the other beings who exist here. And how being in that process as a culture it's like a opening of a wound, of many wounds. And I think that we really need to, as artists, like really own our tools, like that they're very powerful, and especially because like we can tend to our own wounds, I feel, you know, especially as dancers, as embodied, or, you know, whatever you are, if you're working in this way, you know, where the senses are being activated, and there's a kind of, you know, way that you can regenerate, or you have an understanding of how to regenerate, that is something that people need right now.
Mm.
And I think, you know, I've been going to protests, and it's, I mean, at this point, it's really, the backlash is, you know, really intense, because it's right there, you know, like a lot of times I go on the bike protests, and they're not, you know, just yesterday, a car went through and just drove right through a bike protest. And I was going to go on that protest. I didn't go that day. I decided not to go. And it's like,
yes, I mean, what you're saying makes me think about how artists really are visionaries. We can envision the future. So the way we can conceive of living together needs to be spoken out loud and spread as far as we can spread it. Because we do know how to do it, certainly those of us in this particular culture. And yeah, I think that it is important to heal. When you were talking about that, I remembered going to a martial art demonstration, and the I think it was an Indian martial art with incredibly like these coiled metal swords that they would flip out, which seemed awfully dangerous to me. And what the master was saying was that if you know how to kill, you also have to know how to heal people. So you know, the times that we're living in now are so dangerous and so difficult, and we have the skills to be able to heal. And I think a lot of the teaching that we do is very healing on many different levels, not only physical. We know how to heal in physical injury, but I think we're also healing souls and each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the word heal also etymologically comes from whole, which I quite like. I always quite like this connection of a fragmented, broken, ruptured, to an idea of becoming a sense of whole. Or we become parts, we recognize that we're parts of some kind of whole, that we kind of shift from this very, to a kind of shared interest, I guess.
In maneuvering, I think there's a maneuvering within the multiplicity of all the different states of being, which I think artists are really good at, but it's not necessarily named that way within the art world. I think that a lot of times it gets separated out as, you know, oh, this artist is just doing their work and da-di-da-di-da, but like the reality is we can't just do our work anymore. I don't think, like, this, our work has to be the work of, you know, the collective work, or the work in the world work, however you want to call it. But this kind of multiplicity of understanding different states, Roshana, like the healing and the hope, and then also the hopelessness. And, you know, this kind of I think I know that, because I've worked with states work and improvisation, that I can easily shift in and out of these different states of awareness. And so to be in a situation that's heightened all of a sudden, in a militarized place, that can happen anytime, and that's happening in a lot of places. What is the response? And how do we as artists, use the multiple ways that we can respond? And how do we stay ready, like that sword, right? Like, because I think this is what's needed right now.
And see that also, are you saying that you see that this role of creating can inhabit many states, or that the role of creating has some kind of responsibility to become a platform for many voices?
I'm sorry, I have to plug in again because there's a airplane really loud.
No, there's no cars, but there are airplanes.
Hey, airplanes and helicopters, and they're just so, because there's this open space here, you hear all of the air traffic very, very distinctly, very differently from when you're in the city.
Also, the airport is sort of,
yeah.
No,
I'm sorry.
I was saying whether from what you were saying, is it that you see the role of the kind of creative as inhabiting many states and perspective, or is there a responsibility for the creative to create more of a platform for multiple voices? Does the multiplicity come from a direct inclusion of multiple perspective, or is it something of inhabiting or channeling?
Yeah, I think that's such a great question and a great distinction. I think what I was saying is that these tools of navigating multiple states of being as artists, or specifically for myself as an improviser and a dancer, are tools that are actually, how they say soft skills and hard skills, like one matters more than the other.
No.
I think that they're just skills that, because the multiplicity of this kind of knowledge, that they're very necessary right now, and that having that kind of awareness, that multiple awareness, and really not just rejecting. I think there is an aspect of rejecting the narrow way that an artist can embrace. This kind of narrowness of fascism and nationalism. I really think that the artist doesn't work well with that. I mean, unless they're working for the state. And so this kind of multiplicity of understanding the world is something that I think needs to be aggressively put out there as like maybe like hard skills, not soft skills, and because I think that part of how institutions often function is that they tell artists that those skills are soft skills, and that we have, that you can't like build a house with a hammer and a nail. So I mean, actually many artists do know how to do that, or some, but that I think that what I'm trying to say is just that this multiplicity of consciousness and of awareness in the body and of space and the environment and all the ways that one might work as an artist is a skill that needs to be not necessarily, you know, forced on people, but like a martial artist, there is an intention to go into the world and to share this skill in order for people to understand their own multiplicity of their own ability to be multiple.
Mm.
And so that, and I think so much can come out of that could be a starting place for revolution in a way that is not just about a militarized way of thinking, but actually an expansive way of being.
Mm.
Yeah, I like the idea of expansive way of being. And I think that when we are in the world in an expansive way, I think that both information is going out, but also information is coming in. So to be able to teach people to not only understand multiplicity in themselves, but to be able to receive it from others is actually a teaching.
Yeah.
And you know, I do a lot of, I have done a lot of Tai Chi, and there they talk about the soft always overcoming the hard. So it's kind of interesting for me to hear you differentiate between hard and soft, and you know, maybe we do need to put it out in a soft and strong way, and then it can kind of roll between people and amongst people and over people and under people and draw people in.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes, this is great. I love this. I love that image. Yeah. And this, the way you were moving your hands. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, soft is malleable and fluid and changeable, so it's not fixed.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was making me think of everyone as these kind of interfaces, or these like processes of osmosis, or these portals again that travel both ways, of course, in this kind of very mycelial network. I mean, there's a lot talking about that, isn't there? I guess these interconnected ways of being, multiple perspectives. I mean, we live in very much also worlds that a world that is supported by complete multiple perspective, I think. I mean, look at this now that we're having this conversation as well.
Yeah.
That we're kind of on a free fall from any idea of kind of fixed horizons.
Yes, I often think about how countries are trying to close off their borders and limit the movement of people, but actually through mediums like the internet, we can move in such fluid ways, and there are no borders. I mean, we can move beyond the physical boundaries that are being set up.
We have to.
Yes, we do have to. Yes, we. Yeah. Well, I think we should finish now.